absolute crap.
Hey, hey, meet the royals. They're nothing like you and me. Loaded with power and money, and chased by the paparazzi.
Join Davy Jones for a look at the Count and Countess of Controversy. Edward and Sophie on Meet the Royals, next on A&E.
Here they come, walking down the street. They get the funniest looks from everyone they meet. Hey, hey, meet the royals. They're nothing like you and me. Loaded with power and money, and chased by the paparazzi. Hey, hey, meet the royals. Hey, hey, meet the royals.
Now, life should be sweet for Edward and Sophie. Posh digs, fancy titles, and a brand new baby. Trouble is, being seventh in line for the throne gets you a lot of curtsies, but not a lot of cash. Hey, hey, Davy Jones here. Welcome to Meet the Royals, where we lead you into the life of a princely couple. The pressure, the perks, and the pitfalls. Question is, what's a poor prince to do? Well, you get a job, of course. So Edward and Sophie have each forged their way into the workplace, but with disastrous results.
The critics say that Edward's a spoiled child and that Sophie is a gold-digging wife.
Prince Edward has learnt that we don't owe him a living and that he has to achieve something.
Sophie was rather excited by the fact this man was offering a great deal of money. I guess it loosened her tongue a bit.
Let's watch as these two young royals make their way through the ups and downs of their very unroyal careers. On Edward and Sophie, Cash versus Crown, here on Meet the Royals.
Britons rejoice and breathe a sigh of relief. It's 1999, and Edward Windsor, third son to the Queen, has finally popped the question to longtime gal pal Sophie Rhys-Jones, a commoner. The Queen couldn't be happier. And after 5 years of waiting, this Diana lookalike sure has reason to smile. She certainly has come a long way from her humble beginnings. In fact, nothing about this ordinary girl's upbringing hints at her extraordinary ability to bag a prince. Sophie Rhys-Jones was born in 1965 in Brenchley, 40 miles south of that little place called Buckingham Palace. Born in the swinging 60s, this fun-loving gal found lots of excitement in this sleepy town. Mom was a secretary. Dad, a tire salesman.
Not exactly the pedigree of a princess.
But both agreed education was the best way to move up in the world. So Mom worked odd jobs to keep Sophie and her brother David in private school. Like all girls, Sophie dreamed of toe shoes and tutus and practiced hard at ballet school. All those high kicks paid off when it came to the Cinderella casting call. Sophie won the lead and the prince. It wouldn't be the last time. She certainly had her princess act down.
I remember her as a very pleasant, attractive girl, friendly with everybody.
She liked sport and drama. And I think one of her great assets was that she was good at friendship.
She was, I think, reasonably well behaved. She certainly, to my knowledge, never got into any serious trouble for doing anything naughty in school.
It sounds like a snow job to me.
It's true. Behind that shy smile lurked a party animal. Sophie and her friends liked to live dangerously, stealing liquor from Dad and hiding it behind the library sofa. Her teen years were spent drinking at the local pubs, where she was the life of the party and very popular with the boys. And her 21st birthday party left guests strewn across the lawn, one wrapped up in the dog's blanket.
Shocking.
Still, Sophie dreamed of a better life. It was 1981, and all of England was in a frenzy. Lady Diana Spencer was marrying the future king. Like many girls, Sophie became obsessed with the idea of marrying a prince.
Every girl in England who comes from a not particularly well-off background wants to marry into the royal family. Sophie was no different from anybody else in that respect.
But for now, there was more than marriage on this career girl's mind. The big city was calling. Sophie headed to London. First stop, the Quentin Bell Organization, a small public relations company.
She was employed to be a kind of secretary and administrator and just help out generally in everything from making the tea, doing the photocopying, answering the phones, chasing up journalists.
But tea bags and paper clips didn't hold her interest long. She set her sights on one of London's hottest companies, Capital Radio. Suddenly, she was mixing with celebrities and rock stars. It was a dream come true. Sophie quickly got a reputation for loving the high life and the status that came with it.
She enjoyed the big events and those sort of meeting stars and greeting and that kind of bit. I think that's the kind of area that she wants to move into and the kind of circle she wants to move into.
But after living a few years in the fast lane, Sophie decided she needed a change of pace. She accepted a ski rep job in Switzerland and fell in love with Aussie ski instructor Michael O'Neill. But the romance quickly soured. Sophie once again craved the high life of the big city. She decided to head back to London, where PR, a prince, and a palace would all soon come crashing together.
Meet the Royals, brought to you in part by U.S. Bank and by the UPS Store.
Welcome back to another edition of Palace P's and Q's. Today, we're going to find out just how the royals behave when you're not looking. And here's our own etiquette queen, Victoria Mather, with the inside scoop.
But I think they're quite relaxed amongst each other.
You know, what's it like with the royals when they're just, hanging out?
They're not like the rest of us, they never eat in the kitchen. You can't have cosy supper. I don't think they have supper on a tray in front of the telly. They're not very couch potato-y. I mean, the nearest to informality is up at Balmoral when they have barbecues. And in the film about the royal family, the first ever film, which was in 1968, I mean, the nation was gripped by the fact that the Duke of Edinburgh actually was capable of grilling a sausage on a barbecue. I mean, really.
What about the stiff upper lip thing, that they do in public? Does that go behind closed doors as well?
The tears and the tantrums. I'm sure they all go on. I hope they all scream and shout at each other. I think the Duke of Edinburgh is a huge shouter. And Prince Charles has tantrums, and Diana cried. Must be like being in a soap opera. Really cool.
Yeah, it sounds cool. Hey, it could be a new reality TV show, a royalty TV show. Hey, we could call it Meet the Royals.
Unlike Sophie's, Edward's upbringing was positively princely. Born in 1964, he was 16 years younger than stuffy Charles. Edward was the favorite son of the Queen's, but that may not be saying much.
I think that Prince Edward has always been the Queen's favourite. She loves all her children in a very queenly, sovereign sort of way. She's fairly distant from the children. She loves them, but they're slightly a sort of a business proposition. I mean, they don't bowl up and say, "Mummy, I've come for tea," and stroll through the door and that sort of thing. It's much more formal. To get to the Queen, even if you're the Prince of Wales or you're Prince Edward, you have to actually make an appointment.
Called Sir by palace staff, young Edward's world revolved around royal nannies and tight-ship tutors. After a brief stint in private school, it was off to Gordonston, like brother Charles. At this no-nonsense school, mile-long runs and cold showers before breakfast turned boys into men. Nicknamed Goody Goody, Edward was tormented by his classmates. One day, they put super glue on a bench so that when he stood up, his pants ripped off. And his extracurricular activities didn't help his wimpy reputation. He donned makeup and became a regular player in school productions. He developed a passion for showbiz, as well as the old soft shoe that would stick with him for the rest of his life. In 1986, after graduating from the prestigious Cambridge College, it was time for Edward to face his princely duties and join the armed forces. His father suggested he join the good old Marines.
Not the best place for a chap who enjoys Hamlet and tights.
Prince Philip said, well, unless you can go up with something better, I think the Royal Marines is the place for you. And I think he thought, well, I'll give it a whirl. Now, that world was really alien to everything that he knew or liked.
Edward's boot camp soon turned into his worst nightmare. He had to carry fellow recruits on his back 500 yards, wash in a communal bucket of water, swing through the trees like Tarzan, and complete 30-mile marches. Edward was miserable. This was not his idea of fun. Just 2 weeks before graduation, he decided to quit.
The problem was not a physical one. I have talked to Major Bancroft, his OC, about this, and we were well aware of his progress in training. He was doing well in his initial training, and he had all the physical equipment and acumen to have passed training in the Royal Marines.
The press headlines were ruthless, and his Marine squad was left to comment, "You can turn a frog into a prince, but you can't turn a prince into a Marine." Moving on, Edward set his sights on his real love, showbiz. He decided to become a television producer, and his new venture was to be a showstopper, but not the way he'd hoped. Based on a popular TV show, It's a Royal Knockout was Edward's first foray into television production. Edward recruited royal family members and celebrities from around the world to compete in a series of outdoor adventure games for charity. Edward thought he had a winner. Boy, was he wrong.
It pilloried the royal family, the history of Britain. Nobody realized that this was a public relations disaster just waiting to happen.
Edward also had miscalculated one crucial participant: the press. To punish them for the scathing headlines he received for quitting the Marines, Edward confined them to a tent to watch the live event. They were furious.
It was a situation that we were trying to report on. We didn't have much information. It was late in the day when Prince Edward agreed he was going to give this press conference. We were on a deadline, and everybody was pretty pent up. The press conference eventually began when Prince Edward ambled in at his convenience.
Proud of his TV premiere, but oblivious to the reporters' anger, Edward entered into the den of lions.
This is gonna be good.
First of all, I have to apologize if I go to sleep in the middle of this.
So how do you think it's gone?
There are an awful lot of people. I mean, a tremendous number of people. I have to thank. There's been a tremendous team that have helped put this together. And I've lost my voice.
Are you pleased with the way things have gone, sir?
Can I finish?
Uh-oh.
And what he said next really put the nail in the coffin.
Well, thanks for sounding so bloody enthusiastic. What have you been doing in here all day?
May you well ask.
Have you been watching it? Yeah. What did you think of it? Thanks.
I thought it was great.
I was flabbergasted that he could behave in this manner, and somebody, I remember calling out prima donna as he left the room. Well, that was absolutely spot on. But I think we were shocked.
I would say that it was probably the beginning of the end of the love affair between the British nation and its monarchy.
The story we had completely changed. It had moved away from being a charitable affair into this fool Prince Edward.
600 million viewers tuned in to watch the royal family make fools of themselves. The monarchy was humiliated. And as far as the press was concerned, it was open season on the rude and arrogant Edward. In 1988, they were waiting for him again when he scored a production assistant position at Andrew Lloyd Webber's Really Useful Theater Company. The press was quick to note his lowly status by labeling him T-Boy.
I'll take mine with 2 lumps, Ed.
But the job was a little too low for Ed's big ego. He soon left Webber's shop to join a startup theater with some associates. Within a year, the company was in the red, having produced only 2 shows, but spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. The press continued to taunt him, labeling him Petulant Prince for his theatrical displays of emotion. With his television career temporarily unplugged and the curtain drawn on his stage career, Edward had struck out. It wasn't easy being 7th in line to the throne, a position that is heavy in status but light in cash.
Prince Edward has learnt in a harder way than the others that really we don't owe him a living and that he has to achieve something. It's not like it used to be for the royal family. They've really got to make their own way, particularly when you're as far away from the succession to the throne as Prince Edward is.
Edward's life needed to turn around quick. But soon, things would be looking up in the form of a pretty PR girl who, too, had similar ambitions to take the world by storm.
Tomorrow.
Boom! Ah! Keeps this big bravado going on, but he's easily.
What does the white button do?
Sophie's full title is Her Royal Highness the Princess Edward of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Countess of Wessex and Viscountess, is it Viscountess? Viscountess 7. Now, you heard me right. Princess Edward. It seems that when you marry a prince, it's his name that goes into your title. So Diana was actually Princess Charles, and Fergie was really Princess Andrew. Who knew? Still, if you meet Sophie, you're better off not calling her Princess Edward. You see, you might get a backhander for that one. She prefers to be known as just plain old Sophie Wessex.
In 1993, while Edward was still licking his wounds over his failed showbiz attempts, Sophie Rhys-Jones was storming London in her new PR position at MCM Productions. A chance meeting between the two would change their lives forever. Edward was slated to be the guest of honor at a real tennis event, a bizarre combination of squash and tennis that dates back to Henry VIII. MCM was organizing a photo shoot to promote it. When the model for the shoot dropped out, Sophie stepped in. The toothy pair flashed their pearly whites for the cameras, and sparks flew. And even though he was handing out trophies, Edward wouldn't go home empty-handed.
He saw Sophie being taken back onto court by one of the professionals to have her first hit at it. And instead of just watching or saying bye and thank you, he popped upstairs, put his stuff back on again, and went on to have a hit with her. So I suppose if we'd been really sharp-eyed and had picked up something at that stage, we might have been able to maybe date the royal romance from then.
It was a tennis love match for the PR girl and the bachelor prince. As the news leaked of a royal romance, some of Sophie's old chums couldn't believe her luck.
I think I was surprised when I found out that Sophie was involved in one of the royals as much that you'd always be surprised if a colleague of yours starts dating a member of the royal family or indeed might become a princess. I wasn't shocked, but I was surprised. And I mean, to be honest, I think we've had women who've worked here who've been more sort of slowly. Therefore, you might have expected to be more in line to become a princess than Sophie.
The press pounced on the prospects of a new royal girlfriend. Sophie was thrust into the limelight, despite Edward's protests to the press to leave her alone. Edward and Sophie were determined to maintain their privacy and leave the press always wanting more.
You never ever saw them holding hands, you know, or linking arms. And whenever they arrived anywhere, Sophie was always careful to be a few steps behind, or when they were photographed, they would be at the same event, but Edward would appear in one photograph and Sophie in another, never quite together.
I think Sophie and Edward are naturally very keen to keep their private life private. You know, they're always on the lookout for a photographer, say, hanging around a corner.
From now on, Sophie's every move would be scrutinized. Discretion was the key to staying in with Buckingham and out of London Tower.
She has to be completely discreet. She can't put a foot wrong. She has confided to friends that, you know, she has to watch everything she says and everything she does. And I think there has been a little bit concern that she's sort of become prematurely middle-aged because she doesn't seem to be having as much fun as she used to have.
They say that the path of true love rarely runs smooth. When royals romance, that path can soon turn into a minefield. During their courtship, Prince Edward and Sophie Rhys-Jones were always very careful not to offend Her Majesty the Queen. And when they stayed with her at Windsor Castle, they were always given separate bedrooms. But Prince Edward would sneak out of his bedroom and creep down the corridor to join his girlfriend. One night, that plan went very badly wrong. As he tiptoed past the Queen's bedroom, he accidentally stood on one of her beloved corgis. The noise of the barking and yelping sent him scurrying back to his own room. In the morning, he saw the funny side, but only just.
The minute the royal romance was revealed, the comparisons to Diana began.
Diana, look up. Demure smile at the press. Really?
It didn't help that it appeared she had raided Diana's closet.
Well, Sophie doesn't seem to like being compared to Diana, but photographically, they sometimes look incredibly alike.
This creepy photo transformation shows their amazing similarities. But there was one crucial difference between them. Diana was a star. Sophie was not.
I don't think Diana ever saw Sophie as any kind of competition at all. She just saw this rather dowdy-looking girl coming into the royal family. I dare say for a moment she felt rather sorry for her. But Diana was entirely in a different league.
Meanwhile, Edward still had no income to speak of and was still living with Mom.
Poor chap. Although there's worse places to be holed up than Buckingham Palace.
Here we go again. 30 years old and desperate to leave the nest, Edward formed Ardent Productions. He hoped this new venture would provide cash and credibility. Good old Dad got his pals to flip the bill for this first-class facility.
Edward had to do something to justify his existence. So he decided that he would go into television and that he would make better programs than any television company had ever made before. But this was a vanity on his part.
Once again, the press was ready to pounce.
You're not carrying a business card, are you, sir?
Will you be using your name, your royal connections to get this notice? No. What kind of production?
It doesn't work like that. What sort of you might think that. It's to my disadvantage, not to my advantage.
What kind of production?
I remember very well that he said he was never going to trade on his royal connections. And of course, he then set off to do whatever he did. I can't even remember now, they were so dreary and boring. And nobody was even vaguely interested in employing him for anything.
With money in his pocket, the next step seemed obvious. It was time to make an honest woman out of Sophie. But the years dragged on without a royal ring.
His courtship of Sophie really went on a very long time. I think they had their ups and downs, and, you know, 2 or 3 years ago, a very senior member of the household of Windsor told me that the relationship was halfway between lukewarm and stone dead.
One paper even declared the royal romance kaput. But Sophie's PR skills kicked into overdrive, and she spun the story like a pro.
Well, if you were listening a minute ago, I was just saying that really I enjoy working with the press because it has an air of unpredictability about it. I never know what I'm going to read next. But
So is it true or untrue?
I'm sorry, I'm not going to comment on that. But, you know, I have a job to do today, as you can appreciate. So I hope you'll let me get on with it. But it's nice to see you all here. Thank you.
In 1995, when Sophie announced she was leaving her job at McLaurin's to set up her own public relations company, press speculation about an engagement became frenzied.
Any comments about the stories in the papers this morning, Sophie?
Just hold you're all getting a little too excited.
Please.
I think it's to Sophie's credit that she waited around that long. I think a lot of girls wouldn't have done. And Edward, we know, would hum and ha and say, well, maybe next week, next year, tomorrow. I mean, you don't know where you were with him.
It took another 4 years before Edward and Sophie finally announced their engagement on January 9th, 1999.
Sophie had the will, the gumption, and the determination to hang on in there, bring the boy round, and then head him off towards St. George's Chapel, Windsor.
At the press call at Buckingham Palace, they had more than a few things to say to the pesky press.
Contrary to popular opinion, we've never lived together, and I've never issued any ultimatums.
We're the very best of friends, and that's essential, and it also helps that we happen to love each other as well very much, and so, you know, it's great. So we're very happy at the moment, and long may that continue.
The truth of the matter is that by the time that Edward married her, the critics were out looking for him, the knives were out, and he needed to do something to bolster his image. She was the right girl in the right place at the right time.
5 months later, Edward and Sophie would prove them wrong, when all the world would witness the tire salesman's daughter marry the Queen's youngest son.
Before they were masters.
This is Donna from OnStar.
Yes.
I have been on the line with the police the whole time. They have...
OnStar is available on 51 GM models.
Now be sure your tiara is on straight. Meet the Royals continues here on A&E.
It was 1999, and Britain was in a frenzy. The marriage of Sophie Rhys-Jones to Prince Edward was fast approaching. But weeks before their wedding, Sophie was to suffer the first of a long line of scandals that would leave her feeling more red than royal. Years ago, while on a PR promotion, Sophie was photographed sunbathing topless with London shock jock Chris Tarrant. 4 weeks before the wedding, one of the national newspapers got a hold of the picture and splashed it all over page 1. The royal family described it as an act of premeditated cruelty. Sophie was devastated, but nothing was stopping her from walking down that aisle. She and Edward were married June 19th, 1999 in St. George's Chapel at Windsor. This certainly wasn't the big blowout like her famous sister-in-law enjoyed. In fact, it was downright low-key, or as much as you can be with the Queen as hostess.
The Queen got terribly excited about it. She was rushing around, determined to get the best new dress she could to wear for the wedding. I think it meant a great deal to her because Edward's her favourite son, and she wanted him to be happy, and she thought that Sophie was the right girl for him.
It didn't feel like a big formal wedding. It felt very much like a family occasion with friends. It was very relaxed.
very easygoing, the most relaxed royal wedding I've ever been to.
Sophie looked very elegant on her wedding day. She's quite a small person, and the dress elongated her, made her look taller and more elegant. And the dress was set off by a wonderful necklace that Edward had given her as his wedding present, which he'd designed himself in black and white pearls. And she really did look like a royal lady on that day.
With a wave of her wand, the Queen decreed Edward and Sophie the Earl and Countess of Wessex. This middle-class girl finally bagged her Prince Charming. After a few days' honeymoon at Balmoral, the power couple was back at work. They were breaking new ground. Sophie and Edward would be the first royals to maintain full-time careers. Almost immediately, the controversy began.
Charles and Anne were very against Edward and Sophie working because there was no other way they could work than I mean, you can't say, you can't say, hello, I'm Sophie Wessex, and expect people not to think, well, this girl would be a great PR because she's so high profile. I mean, you can't disassociate the two.
PR Week had an exclusive interview with Sophie Rhys-Jones just on the eve of her wedding, and she talked in a lot of detail about the guidelines that she's set down for her company to ensure that she couldn't be seen to be trading on her royal connections.
Ed and Sophie were living like royalty. They chose Bagshot Park as their new marital love nest. With a $400,000 a year maintenance fee, it wasn't exactly a starter home.
The Wessexes live in a very grand style in Bagshot Park, which is just ginormous. I think it's got 50 bedrooms or something and about 400 other rooms. It's ridiculous.
They've got a very big house to keep up, and therefore they are forced into this situation of having to work hard to keep it up.
To make matters worse, Edward's production company was failing. Already $3 million in debt, he was desperate to keep the doors open. To maintain their lavish lifestyle, the Wessexes needed cash, and fast.
It's time to play Cash in the Crown, where Edward and Sophie compete for scandalous press coverage while trading in on their royal status. Who will win in the race? And the coveted title, Monarch of Money. And away we go.
To save Arden, Edward started producing shows on topics he understood best. His own family.
What's so bad about that?
He has cashed in on his royal status, and most of the successful films that Ardent have made have been about the royal family, which he's had unprecedented access to. Obviously, I think that's given him a lot of very snipey sort of publicity.
That gives home video a whole new meaning. 2 points, Ed. Next.
Edward then flew to America to give a lecture tour and was paid a cool $72 grand.
So?
He put his royal title on the lecture invitations.
When people saw his name displayed very prominently, they felt that the royal family and the royal coat of arms was being used and exploited for profit, and it was very hard for Prince Edward to argue otherwise.
Marvelous work. 1 point. Now who says this kid isn't good at anything? Next.
Edward also made a disparaging remark to an American newspaper about the British resenting successful people.
Fantastic.
Of course, he didn't mean to say it like that, because he's very supportive of Britain. But he does have a habit of saying things in a manner which means they can be misconstrued. And he is not popular.
Sounds like he's a chip off the old block, Prince Philip. 1 point. Sophie, will you ever catch up?
Just 3 months after her wedding, Sophie's public relations firm was thriving. But she got cocky and sloppy.
Sounds juicy.
While at the Frankfurt Motor Show, she allowed herself to be photographed in a compromising position. It appeared that she was endorsing a product, and the picture created an instant outcry.
She was quite clearly trading on the fact that she was a member of the royal family, even by marriage, and that actually isn't very acceptable.
Well, excuse me. 3 points.
But the biggest scandal of Sophie's career was about to erupt.
Now we're talking.
Sophiegate would devastate Sophie and her company forever.
Looks like we have a winner, folks. I can't wait to hear this one.
Join Hugh Hefner and special guests Jenny McCarthy and Drew Carey for Playboy's 50th anniversary celebration next Sunday at 8 on AM.
Bring the British monarchy into your castle. Order this episode of Meet the Royals on VHS for only $24.95 plus shipping and handling. To order, call 1-800-423-1212 or shop online at aetv.com.
By 2001, Sophie and Edward had already had their fair share of run-ins with the press. Mixing work and royal duties had gotten them both in hot water. And Sophiegate would once again bring these two worlds crashing together. Here's how it all went down. One night at the exclusive Dorchester Hotel, Sophie and her business partner, Murray Harkin, met with a wealthy sheik whom they thought was a potential client. Sophie and Murray were ready to say anything to win the business.
One of the ways of getting big commissions and big customers was to say, you know, my mother-in-law is the sovereign. That does convince a number of people that she's a pretty special person.
The wealthy sheik was really an undercover newspaper reporter. He had been tipped off that shady business was being conducted at Sophie's firm. And every word of his conversation with Sophie was being taped.
I think she got sort of rather excited by the fact this man was offering a great deal of money to her PR company to have his account, and I guess it loosened her tongue a bit.
Believing she was talking to a cash cow client, Sophie began to speak her mind on all matters, and it wasn't pretty. She called the Prime Minister President Blair and his wife Cherie horrid. She described her brother-in-law Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles as #1 on the unpopular people list, and the Queen as the old dear. And as a finale, Sophie boasted about the advantages to clients of her royal connections. It was an unspoken advantage of using her firm. To make matters worse, her partner, Murray Harkin, admitted to liking the odd line of cocaine and offered to organize parties with young boys.
Those were the kind of things that he was offering potential clients. You know, we were talking about drugs, we were talking about rent boys, all of these kind of things. Those are the things that came out in the news of the world peace. So you had basically two areas. She was taking advantage of her royal position, and you know, he was taking advantage of other situations.
Within a few minutes of meeting these people, they were saying things which most people wouldn't impart to their closest friends after a few glasses of wine.
It was a public relations disaster for the PR princess who should have known better.
Sophie, I think, is not very intelligent. If she had thought for a moment that she could use her royal connections to get herself business and to get away with it without the British press finding out, then she's never bothered to read a tabloid newspaper in her life.
On advice from the palace, Sophie agreed to an exclusive interview with the newspaper in exchange that the tapes never be made public. The plan backfired.
She was advised to do it by a palace official, and she was following orders, so she did it, and it made things a million times worse.
The tapes leaked out anyway, and while on the hot seat, Sophie created another scandalous headline when she frankly declared, "My Edward is not gay."
And there it was in print, you know. No, I can assure you my husband, Edward, is not gay. Well, do you know, most of the country actually hadn't thought he was. But when they read this, a hell of a lot of them said, do you know, I'd never thought of that, but I think maybe he is gay.
No, not that there's anything wrong with that.
Sophie returned home from a trip abroad to face the storm. She later announced that she regretted her misjudgment, and her partner Murray Harkin resigned. But the damage was done. Clients were dropping like flies, and Sophie had no one to blame but herself.
She was utterly devastated. She was so low. She said to me, whatever I do, I can't win.
I don't think she's naive. I think she's totally calculating. You know, she was old enough and ugly enough to know exactly what she was doing. They got what they deserved. No big deal, but, you know, put your hands up.
It was a poor public relations business anyway, because she didn't even see what a public relations disaster it was going to be, both for her and her husband and the House of Windsor.
It spoke volumes as to, you know, the ability of their PR expertise.
It's just a rule of thumb that you never discuss the family to any stranger. And Sophie did, and she really, really got into trouble for it. The Queen and Prince Philip were very sympathetic because they felt she'd been set up. The British public thought she was incredibly stupid.
Edward and Sophie put on a united front at their first official engagement since the scandal. But it was obvious Sophie was no longer comfortable living in the spotlight.
Sophie, are you staying in your job?
She's obviously stepped back from a little bit of the limelight, and she's not the head of the company as such, but she's still working and doing her own thing, but in a more discreet way. And I bet she's checking everyone out these days. I bet that'll be a lesson she'll never forget.
Having barely gotten over this scandal, another was about to break. When a television crew was caught trying to film Prince William at his new college, Prince Charles went berserk. This blatant breaking of the privacy rules was unacceptable. More so when it was discovered it was Uncle Edward's company behind it all.
It must have been a disappointment to the Queen to discover that that was all he could do, exploit her family. To see her grandson, Prince William, being chased by Prince Edward's film crews. And it was a moment when the British nation decided that Prince Edward was pretty useless.
Finally, Sophie and Edward had had enough.
We've all had enough.
Their careers had been a royal flop. So much for making a show of holding down a job. It was time to call it quits. During the Queen's Golden Jubilee, Edward and Sophie announced it was time to support the Queen, and an official announcement was made.
I always knew in the back of my mind that one day things would have to change. Well, that day has come, and it's not just for me, but also for my wife. And it's quite obvious in this year, the Golden Jubilee, that we are required more than ever to support the Queen and to help my family shoulder some of the increasing responsibilities.
Well, I think Edward and Sophie were at a turning point in their lives. That they just hadn't managed to control their working life.
The Queen would now pay $830,000 for Edward and Sophie to become full-time royals.
He's back on Mum's payroll now. They've realized that he can't earn a living for himself, so Mum is paying all the bills.
Resigning from their businesses, each would pursue more traditional roles in charity work.
They're both now finally coming into line, and they're behaving like proper royals, but they've had to be beaten into it, and it was not a very pretty sight.
When Prince Edward dropped out of the Marines, his macho father, Prince Philip, was heartbroken. And his youngest son suffered the humiliation of being the only male member of the royal family barred from wearing a uniform on important state occasions. Well, this year, his mother, the Queen, took pity on him. She's made him honorary Colonel-in-Chief of 2 minor regiments, the Royal Wessex Yeomanry and the Saskatchewan Dragoons. Now, after 16 years in civvies, he's able to wear a uniform again. Hooray! Even so, he's got a ways to go. His big sister, Princess Anne, still outranks him. She's Colonel-in-Chief of 14 regiments.
Today, Sophie and Edward have a whole new role to take on as parents. In November 2003, Sophie and Edward welcomed their first child, a girl. But the Queen's newest grandchild may not boost their image.
I think the British nation is bored with Edward and Sophie because they're boring. And having a child, I don't think, is going to make a huge amount of difference. I think for a moment there will be a flurry of interest, but it will disappear, just as most people, I think, hope Edward and Sophie will disappear.
Regardless, new challenges face this young couple as they begin their second career as official royals and take on the hardest job of all, parenting.
Hey, you gotta give Edward and Sophie credit. They're the first royals in history to blend career and crown. So they made a mess of it. At least they tried to pay their own way. And now, we'll all keep an eye on how they do bringing up baby. Meantime, thanks, and see you next time on Meet the Royals.
Tomorrow.
Boom! Keeps this big bravado going on, but he's easily touched.
I do respect the power of a camera. The only litmus test that I use is I don't want to embarrass my family.
The Real Will Smith on Biography. Tomorrow at 8, only on A&E.